Hello, welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Pride and Prejudice. Chapter 19 Scandal. As much as Elizabeth was enjoying her visit to Lambton, she longed to hear from Jane. When a letter finally arrived, it was filled with distressing news. Jane wrote to say that Lydia, their high-spirited sister, had run off with Wickham. Mrs. Bennet was beside herself and their father was frantic. Everyone believes the worst. We only hope that they will be married quickly, since they have just seemed to have disappeared without a trace, wrote Jane. Oh, where is my uncle? Cried Elizabeth, darting from her seat as she finished the letter. But as she reached the door, it was opened by a servant, and Mr. Darcy appeared. Her pale face and upset manner alarmed him. Good God, what is the matter? He cried. I'll have the servant set out for the gardener's. Elizabeth hesitated, but her knees trembled under her. She sat down, unable to support herself, looking so ill that it was impossible for Darcy to leave her. I am all right. I am only distressed by some dreadful news which I have received from Longbourn. She suddenly burst into tears, and for a few minutes could not speak another word. Darcy sat her in compassionate silence. At length she spoke again. I have terrible news. My youngest sister has left and eloped with Mr. Wickham. They have gone off together from Brighton. You know too well, doubt the rest. She has no money, no connections, nothing that can keep him with her. She is lost forever. I am very sorry, cried Darcy. Are you absolutely certain? Oh, yes, they left for Brighton together on Sunday night, and no one has heard a word, Elizabeth sobbed. And what has been done to find her, he asked. My father has gone to London to seek my uncle's help, but nothing can be done. How can they cope with such a man? Darcy shook his head in silent agreement. Looking at him, she realized how much his strength and kindness meant to her. Never had she felt before how much she could have loved him, but she could not think about herself. She must think about Lydia, the humiliation and the misery she would bring upon herself and her family. Darcy waited for her to collect herself, then spoke with gentle restraint. I wish to heaven there was something I could do. Just please keep this news to yourself, begged Elizabeth. Conceal the happy truth as long as possible. I will leave for home today. As she finished speaking, her uncle arrived. Darcy bowed and excused himself. Elizabeth wondered about Lydia. When did she become friendly with Wickham? Why had she done such a reckless thing? At the same time, Elizabeth thought of Darcy. Would she ever see him again? I've been thinking it over again, Elizabeth said her uncle as they drove from the town. It is unlikely that Wickham would ruin a girl staying with the colonel's family. Could he expect their friends would not step forward? Could he expect to be kept in the regiment after such an affront to Colonel Forster? Do you really think there is hope? Cried Elizabeth, brightening up for a moment. Upon my word, said Mrs. Gardner, I agree with your uncle. It really is too great a violation of decency and honor to think of his doing anything else. But why all the secrecy? Why the fear of detection? Why must their marriage be private? Asked Elizabeth. Wickham will never marry a woman without some money. He cannot afford it. You think Lydia so lost everything but love of him that she would stay with him without being married? Asked her shocked aunt. Frankly, I don't know what to think, replied Elizabeth. Perhaps I am not doing her justice, but she was very young and has been allowed to behave in the most idle and frivolous manner. They traveled as quickly as possible, and sleeping one night on the road, reached Longbourn by dinner the next day. It was a comfort for Elizabeth to be home. Elizabeth jumped from the carriage and ran straight to Jane. Is there any news? The sister embraced tearfully. Not yet, replied Jane. Mother hasn't left her bedroom. Come and see her at once. Mrs. Bennet received them with tears and cries of regret. She blamed everyone but herself for Lydia's conduct. If I had been able, she said, to go to Brighton, this would never have happened. Why did the Forsters ever let her out of her sight? Mr. Gardner tried to reassure his sister, complaining to her that he would meant to be in London the very next day and would assist Mr. Bennet in finding Lydia. Oh, my dear brother, replied Mrs. Bennet, when you get to town, find them wherever they may be. If they are not married already, make them marry. Above all, keep Mr. Bennet from fighting. Tell him I am frightened out of my wits. Jane and Elizabeth went to their own room. Elizabeth longed to tell her sister all that had happened, but this was not the time. Now all their concerns had to be about Lydia, her safety, and her situation. Because of her thoughtless, foolish behavior, they might possibly never hold their heads up again. If Darcy had thought little of her family before, Elizabeth could not bear the thought of what he must be thinking now. All thoughts of Darcy and of Pemberley and bright hopes for the future must be forgotten. Most of all, Lydia had to be found. Even poor Jane's loss of Bingley was nothing compared to this. And that's the end of that chapter. See you later.